Let's now take a look at the useContext hook in React. So imagine in your web application, we have a hierarchy of React components that resembles the hierarchy tree that you see currently on the screen. In this hierarchy, the parent component is the app component, and within that component, we have two child components, component A and component B. Component B itself also has a child component, which is component C. And in this React component hierarchy, we want to maintain user information of the currently logged in user. So for example, component C needs to know who the currently logged in user is to display some information that might be relevant to that user. But in this situation, the user information is stored in the app component, and component C needs to find a way to get that information from the app component. One method that it can leverage is app component can provide the information to component B via props, and component B can provide information to component C via props. But this gets messy because we will require our components to use props to pass data along, and we don't know in the hierarchy how far down the component tree the information will be required. So that's not the intended solution that we require. Instead, what we can do is we can use the useContext hook. And we can think of the useContext hook like a special messenger that helps us access shared data. Essentially, any component that needs to provide information to its child component can use the useContext hook, and any child component, whether first level child or second level child or nth level child, can access that information within that context by leveraging the useContext hook. So there is a concept of a producer and there is a concept of a consumer in the useContext hook. Now to demonstrate this further, let's take a look at it via an example in VS Code. In the project, we've actually gone ahead and created the components that we just looked at in the hierarchy tree. So let's take a look. We have our app component, which is going to be a parent component, and that itself has two child components, which are component A and component B. In the JSX, we have a simple header label to identify this is an app component, and it has a label below our children of app component. And we have the two children, A and B. If we look at component A, it is similarly, it's very simple. It has a header label and has a set of text. And in the text, we're indicating that we don't know the username in component A yet because we're not using any props. If we look at component B, we have a header label to identify component B, and it indicates by a set of text that it has a child, which is component C. If we look at component C, it has a header and it has a set of text that also indicates it does not know the username because we're not using props. So let's take a look and see how we can provide the username information in the hierarchy of the component tree, because the username information is currently stored in a variable in the app component. Now, likely you would not be storing the information in this manner. You would be using the useState hook or some other means to store this in the hierarchy of the web application. So let's see how we can use the useContext hook. To use it, what we can do is we can define a variable. For example, we'll define a variable called userContext, and this will capture the context we will create. So we will create it using react.createContext function call. And in the function call, we'll provide a default value. Currently, we will leave it as blank because the initialization value we won't know, and likely we will be identifying that later once the user logs in. Now, to use the user context that we just created, what we can do is we can wrap the children that would need to know the information captured in the user context in the user context.provider tags. So this is a way that in the DOM tree, we can indicate to React that there is a information vault, and anything that is a child of this information vault will need to have access to that information in the vault. Now, as a user context provider, we need to provide the value that our children will be concerned about. And in this case, it will be the username, which we've captured in the variable John Smith. So this is how we look at the concept of the user context provider. Now, because we are the provider as the parent component, we need to also tell the consumers in our application, which are going to be component down in the hierarchy, to know how to consume this information. What we will do is we will first import the useContext hook from the React library. As well, when we will navigate to the app component again, we will mark the user context as export. So that way, this value is available to other components in our project. Now, in component C, we will import the user context from the app component. And now to use the value that is getting provided by the provider of the user context, what we can do is we can define a variable, JavaScript variable, const username, and we can retrieve this value by simply calling the useContext hook. And as a parameter of the function, we can provide user context. That way, we're able to retrieve the value that's contained in the user context vault into a variable called username. Now, when we want to use it in our functional component, we can use it as any other regular variable. And in this case, we will just evaluate it in an expression so that we can display it in the JSX rendering in the browser. So now we're going to save. We're going to save the app component as well. Now let's navigate to the browser. And when we do that, we can see the components rendered. We have the parent app component. Within that, we have the two child components, A and B. B has the child component C. And now component C is aware of the username information. So that in a nutshell is the value of the useContext hook in React. It's essentially a vault that we can attach to a point in the DOM tree, and any nodes below that as children in the DOM tree can have access to information in that vault.